Hello everyone and welcome to this video where I'm going to be talking about advanced hull design. Now this is a topic that commonly comes up, and funny enough, people write comments saying things like, "You built that hull in 2 minutes, like how on earth did you do that? It took me an hour and I'm still struggling." Well, in this video I'm going to show you. This is one of my first ships. In fact, it's the first ship that ever hit the workshop from me, and it went to the homepage or the main page. And take a look at the shape of the hull. You do have a lot of nice lines, some curvature, and overall a shape that is not purely just like a very simple. It looks a little more intricate. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that. Before I dive into the details of how to do it, you could see here in the workbench the way the lines work with the curvature of the hull. So there are clearly a different number of shapes used in the preparation of the hull, primarily the inverse pyramids and the regular pyramids. And the combination of them gives you sort of an advanced hull that doesn't follow convention. By convention, I just mean you come and you start piling on the various triangle pieces, as I'm doing right here. You can see it kind of at work. And by piling them one on top of the other, you end up with a very basic kind of uniformly curved hull. And then here for the center, of course, you'll just use a regular wedge piece. And you could obviously do this in the different sized pieces, so you don't have to do what I did here with the inverse pyramid. You could of course do that with the 1x2 inverse pyramid as well, but in essence the idea is the same. You take it, and once it's positioned like this, you just drag it out. Now keep in mind, shift changes the orientation, so you could do this, and then you just start piling on. So you could see as we kind of go out towards the stern of the ship here, the lines are quite consistent, right? You just have them always following that one single shape. And then here in these types of places, you just fill in the dots. And like I did for the front, we can just come here with the 1x2 wedge and slap it in here all the way to the top, and there you go. So this, in my opinion, is what a simple hull is, not advanced, because in the form of a simple hull, just like you see here, you have one consistent piece that you use throughout the design. Now, this isn't ugly. This still looks really cool, and it'll work. And the topic of this video is not to create the fastest hull or the best designed hull. I know there are a lot of factors that come into it, and in fact, sometimes people prefer not to have the triangular, the wedge pieces. They just kind of have it a bit more blocky. I like when it's smooth, and maybe it's not the fastest, but you could always up your engine size. So this isn't a video for efficiency, it's for, call it a nice looking hull. So there you have it, what I call simple, and for comparative purposes here, what I call advanced. And again, like I said, doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but if you look at real life ships and boats, they'll have something like this, even for wave control and for kind of slicing through the water. So I took inspiration from that for my hull designs, or something like this. And even with parts like this, you still can merge them into the body nicely, where it actually kind of fits and looks like a part of the hull and not like it's just kind of thrown in. Now, there are really advanced hull designers out there. I wouldn't say I'm one of them, but I think I'm somewhere in the middle, and I'm quite happy with that because I focus on a very wide spectrum of details as I do my builds. So for me, if my hull is good enough, then I'm on to the next task, whether it is programming a display or making additional vehicles or whatever the case may be. And of course this applies to hulls, but it also applies to pretty much anything in the game because the blocks are the same, kind of like Lego. So if you know how to build an advanced hull or use the shapes to your advantage, well then you can also build better cars, better planes, helicopters, spaceships, whatever the case may be. You can have the right curvature and stuff like that. So this is a hull made by Sheppy5, who is a great builder and one of my Discord server admins, and he let me use this hull for one of my designs. But you could see here, it starts off simple, right? You have kind of this pattern here, but then by the time it gets up here, you've actually introduced a kink. So now you have two different types of blocks, and likewise here, now this goes to this point, and now you have the kink a little lower, and in this case now it's fully here, and you've now introduced a new wedge. So here you see it's the 2x4, here it's the 1x4, and here it is the large 4x4 inverse pyramid. So depending on the different pyramids, you can stack them and give yourself a beautiful hull design. Now back to what I called our simple hull, right? This one that we kind of throw together with the 1x1s in the front and the 2x1s in the back. Well, for one, and this is kind of straightforward and obvious, you don't need to have this edge. You can go ahead and remove that, and you can put in a nice piece like that. It just rounds it up a little, and that is not an advanced technique, but just something I like to do. Now this hull is quite small, so it's a miniature version, but you will get the premise. So see here how I used all the 1x1 blocks. If we go ahead and scrap one of these like this, just to give you a visual, you'll see how this works. So say we have the 1x1s leading up to the first two slots like this, and then you leave yourself with a wedge piece here. Well, if you come in with a 1x2, it fits, right? You put it up like this, you move it up one slice, and if you grab the regular pyramid, boom, you've now inserted this, you've changed the shape, you've changed the dynamic, and we can go ahead and actually remove everything forward of that because it will affect the rest of the hull. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But pretty much, you come in, grab the 1x2, and drag it up like this. And then you can grab the piece in there, fill this in, just like that. And now, yes, you made your hull a little higher, so you can either do this, make everything higher, or you can fill it in with a wedge piece. You know, real life boats actually have the front a little higher, so waves can it can break through waves without splashing on the deck, so this still works. And then you can actually, and I'm holding just control and pressing the piece to kind of select what I have here. You can now drag this out further. And now you've changed the shape of the hull, just like I showed you. So you went from a 1x1 to a 2x1. And you can kind of close this off by just continuing on with your pieces as such. So you do that, and then you grab one of these like that, and then just drag it out to the rest of the ship, or rest of the hull. And it does take a little more time. It is a little more time consuming, but in the end, you do end up with a product, I would say, that looks much better. So if we just do that, take a look at that. So in a very miniature scale, obviously you can size up or down as needed. You can end up with something that kind of is a bit more curvy, so it's not just one single shape, unless that's what you're going for. It could be a very pointy ship, but if you want something a little more gradual, you can kind of end up with a gradient like that. What if you want to replace this here with a 4x1? Well, you absolutely can. So if we go ahead and remove some of these, you can actually place this right here and see how that changes the bottom layout of the ship. Now you don't need this piece here, you can actually just continue with this, and now you've added the 4x1. Now keep in mind you didn't add it here on the bottom row, so these are still a little different, and I just removed them now for visual purposes. But what you can do is come in here and put in this, and then come in here, select the one block, the 1x1, pull it out, obviously close it up just like this, and then finish it off with the regular blocks. So now you've introduced an even more defined gradient as it kind of goes in. And of course you didn't have to use a 4x4, you could have used, or a 4x1, you could have used a 2x1, but whatever the case may be, you can kind of mix and match this combination, and you don't have to have one single joint as I did here. You can have multiple joints. What I mean by that is, if you want to now have, instead of a 2x1 or 1x2 wedge here, say you want to convert it even more like flat in the front into a 4x1, you can do this. Now keep in mind, when you start doing stuff like that, you may end up with an issue like this, where your piece doesn't fit. And sure, yes, you can just fill in the inside, but that doesn't look good. Doesn't look nice. It looks blocky and awkward. And maybe you want something kind of futuristic, and then it works, but for the case of a smooth hull, that does not work. You've now introduced a piece that isn't intended to fit there properly, and you can try to salvage it, but you see the bottom here lines up, that's nice, but the curve is not right. Now there's definitely a lot of trial and error, but my advice is try to be patient with it, because changing the curvature does affect how the rest of the hull kind of comes into it. Now sometimes it's easier to start with something like this and then see, like, start beyond this and see if you can tie it in. But in my experience, merging from a 1x2 to a 1x4 in a joint that's not a flat joint, like, keep in mind this here is a flat joint, you'll have better luck merging with other types of blocks. So for example, if I removed all this, you see how here we went from flat into the 1x2. Well, see this joint here, how it is already 1x2. You can quite easily make it a 2x2. So you can actually bring it back into being a 2x2, and then down here you already have the right pyramid shape, the 1x2, and you can throw that in there, and then you just kind of work your way up. And see here, you'd go and grab your 1x2 wedge. Now, if this is something you want, then that's fine. I mean, I probably wouldn't work with something where you kind of go in and then go back out, but the advantage is you can. Now see here, right here, this area may be a little complex, because now you have a joint that requires a 2 and a 2, but if we grabbed this piece, see how it doesn't fit there? So let's try with the 2x4. There you go. So now you've actually done another change. You went from a block that was 2x2 into now a 2x4. And it may or may not work here in the very front. Like, we got kind of pointy. But you see this one here in green. We got to put something there that actually closes the boat off and is continuous. So you can start playing around with seeing what works. Now there is some trial and error, but see, like, that does not work. And then if you grabbed a 2x1 and threw it in there and dragged it out, there you go. And now you're left with a 4x1 or 1x4 block that you just close. Oops, nope, you're not. You're left with a 2x1, my bad. So this, you can drag it all the way out, and there you have it. So now you've actually went from a couple different pieces and not just the joint. So the easiest one to do is when you have this flat joint, let's call it, or like flat wall, into a new type of block. So here we had 1x1s, down here we have 1x4s, and up here we have 2x1s all the way to the top. So that's the easiest type of joint in my opinion, because you just have the ability to kind of switch around how you're coming in. The harder type is when you're going from an already curved surface, such as these 2x1 blocks, into something more complex like a 2x2. And even more complex when you try to go from that into something else, like this 2x4. So, in essence, that is what I would consider an advanced hull. Yes, it is a little confusing, just because you do have to kind of be very cognizant of what you're putting in, and it does take some trial and error. And using this technique doesn't have to be on top, like pointy. You can also make kind of the bulbous shape of the hull that I showed you earlier. You just got to be patient, and you got to kind of start with the simple parts, in my opinion. So something like this, and then make your way down. So once you kind of start the defining edge, and of course it's always easier to go back into a flat, but if flat isn't what you're looking for, you can always put a pyramid. In the case of the bulbous shape, it works. You just see that joint isn't very nice there, but because you have this, which is actually the most versatile piece, is a 1x1, well, you're at an advantage because you can grab the wedge piece of any kind and insert it, sorry, not wedge, the inverse pyramid, and insert it into that 1x1 slot. So whether you put a 4 long, or whether you put a 2 long, as long as it's the base shape is 1, you can do that. So maybe in the case of our bulbous hull, we kind of like something like that, and then this of course would just have to taper out or become a part of the hull later on, whether we used, you know, triangular pieces like this to kind of seal it up. The joint I find is the hardest, just because to make it kind of feel proper and continuous, otherwise you're stuck with something that looks a little awkward. But you can do that, for example, in a obviously different form, and then kind of merge it into the rest of the hull. But that's the kind of thing we do there. Now over here we have a bit of a clean slate, and you could do the same thing. Grab a 2x1 and throw it in just like this, and now you've entirely changed the shape. Remember, we were using 1x2s, and now we've gone into 2x1s. Now if you drag it out, done. Simple. Like I said, the joint here on the flat is the easiest. Changing it later on is a little harder, but we can do that too. We can go here and see how we were using the 2x1s. You can come right here and start to drag this down and out to kind of create a fantail, but now that does not work. So this joint here has to actually migrate back into a 1x1 block. And now we've created another joint where we went from the 2x2 into a 1x1, and at the very bottom we're actually in a 2x2 in the other orientation. There you go. So a little more nice curves, and I like a combination. I like the flat joint, and I like the non-flat joint areas too, just because it gives it that much more kind of nice shapes as you go. Anyway, that is in essence this video. Maybe a little confusing, but if you just take your time and play around with the shapes, you will create a more advanced hull, and it'll improve the aesthetics of your builds if that's what you're going for, and maybe it improves the speed if you're testing for that. But thank you so much for watching. Huge shout out to all of my supporters. They get early access to things and they show me extra love. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate each and every one of you for watching these videos, for subscribing, for commenting, for all of the community, the engagement, the interactions, everything. I love it all. Thank you so much, and until next time, happy Stormworksing, everyone.